Hello, hello. Thank you for tuning in today. We are Julie and Sandra, your mother and daughter coaching team. We work with professional women who are after a more fulfilling life, yet it is nowhere in sight. We help women get to the bottom of why they are here, address the causes of their overwhelm and like that feeling of chaos in their lives, so they really can align their lives and their businesses with their true purpose, have the impact that they were made to have, and start living their life as their next level self. And this is the podcast for those who are hungry to discover who they truly are, want to achieve their goals by exploring their life purpose and expand their impact on the world. Here we talk about how to clear limiting beliefs, learn to think beyond how we've been conditioned to think, and really optimize our energy systems so that we can thrive in our businesses, our relationships, our health, our life in general. And I just want to say thank you for tuning in today. We are going to be talking about communication, all of the things that we didn't learn in school regarding communication. So, Mom, do you want to kind of kick us off in this direction?
Yeah, this has been a interesting week of working with clients, and like Julie said, all the things we didn't learn in school. I was actually invited to talk to an entrepreneur who has this as his series, and we got to talking about all the things that we didn't learn. And communication is definitely one of those things. Most of us learn our communication through our families, through our culture, and a lot of us didn't really get a great education there. And Julie, you and I started talking about all the things we didn't learn in school. We started asking some of our clients, and the list came up with how to be confident, how to speak up for yourself, how to set good boundaries, how to actually deal with conflict, and really how to increase emotional awareness and intelligence, and even really talking about what that is. So that's moved us further to this conversation today, especially because we have these conversations all of the time in our program Unleash with the women that are in that group. And I think that today we're just going to delve into the conversations we're having with others and the areas where we think we could help, and really share some of our experiences with how we became better at communication. And I think, Julie, you could start off with just telling everyone about what you studied in college.
Yeah. I mean, I think like as I'm even listening to you rattle off like all the things people say that they didn't learn in school, I'm like, they all have this underlying theme of being communication issues, like being confident, speaking up for yourself, setting boundaries. Like those all stem from how we think about ourselves, so like our self-image, but they also stem from the way that we're able to communicate what our needs are and communicate clearly what we're thinking, how we're feeling, all of these things to other people. And this is the area where I feel like everyone struggles. They like maybe are able to, especially if you're like diving into the self-development work, or just learning to like better yourself as a human or grow as a human, you start being like, okay, I'm starting to get in touch with like what my needs are, how I feel, how I think about myself. Like you start to do that. But I think the part where everybody gets caught up is then like, how do you bring that to like an interpersonal interaction? Like you're like, okay, I got this stuff, but then like, how do I
Do it. Yeah.
like it'd be really easy to be like walking around as enlightened, like zened out beings if we never had to interact with anybody else.
Yeah.
That's so not what actually happens. So, I started out learning about communication in college, really. I mean, no, you start learning about communication the second you're born, right? But like formally studying communication in college, I actually went to this tiny school in Boulder, Colorado called Naropa University. Pretty much no one has ever heard of it. If you have, give me a shout out. I want to know who knows about Naropa. If you have never heard of it, go look it up. It's the coolest school. And it was through Maybe this was my first greatest manifestation, was getting myself to school there.
Yeah.
Like I knew that I really struggled in high school, I think, especially to be engaged in my education. And I think often I was really bored and I just didn't, the true conventional way of educating did not work for me. Like I'm not a like study this, take a test, regurgitate the knowledge. Like that just didn't resonate. And I quite frankly was like completely bored by it and just decided to like go all in on my social life instead. Um, though I did excel, for those who might know me, my few best friends who are probably listening to this from high school, I excelled in the arts. So I was actually in AP ceramics.
Yep.
So it was not all studies that I tanked in, right? But it really was I had to really, like, I only wanted to do well at the things I was interested in. And I think by some divine intervention, I had a knowing that like I wasn't going to succeed in a normal college setting. And like being in a huge lecture hall with 300 other people, I just had this like intuition that like I was going to flunk out of that. There was no way that I was going to drive myself through that situation. And so we ended up researching like smaller schools. I don't even know how we found out about Naropa, especially. But ping, there it was. And I looked it up and I think I was like, Mom, I'm going to school here. And you were like, make it happen.
Yeah, because you were like, we don't have money for all of this, and I don't know how that's going to happen. And I just knew that if the two of us put our minds together, we could make it happen. And guess what? We did. And I think it was your third year, Julie, you actually were given a scholarship.
Presidential scholarship. Yeah.
Presidential scholarship. So, I mean, I think it was the greatest experiment in manifestation you and I have ever coordinated together.
Yeah.
And it created this reality and this school that was a perfect fit for you.
It was a perfect fit for me. And it was like, I mean, it was a private college. And previous to that, I was like, there's no way I could afford to go to a private school. Like I had so many limitations around my thinking. But I think I was just so clear on like where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in Boulder. I was super drawn to the, you know, area of Boulder and Colorado. And I was like, we're making this happen. So we made it happen. I got a 4-year degree in peace studies at Naropa. And peace studies was basically a dive into conflict, communication styles, trauma. It was studying a lot of international conflict, like a lot of studying what's kind of happening right now in our world. With Israeli Palestinian conflicts, things like that, like so big heavy things. But then there was also a lot of understanding like interpersonal dynamics and even like some psychology of trauma healing, that sort of thing. So I, in that process, was also being trained as a mediation facilitator. So I have a pretty deep understanding of like how to listen to people and like how to get other people to listen to each other and also be able to communicate with one another. And the best tool that I was taught in my degree was that of nonviolent communication. And this is something we teach in all of our coaching programs, and I use it with all of my coaching clients. And even when I worked in the chiropractic industry, like this was a foundation for like how I managed teams also and coordinated people in an office. It was really like based in how do we communicate respectfully for one another. And I think the root of nonviolent communication, if you want to learn more, by the way, go look up the Center for Nonviolent Communication. They have a ton of free resources on their website. There is a book, I think it's just called Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. He's the one who created this discipline, but it's phenomenal. It's life-changing. There are like YouTube videos out there. There's so many ways to train yourself in nonviolent communication that are very low cost. So go do that. But the premise of nonviolent communication and why it's called nonviolent is because it is taking like radical accountability for your thoughts and your feelings. And it's taking judgment out of any sort of communication. So what happens in conflict so often is that we're in a conflict because we're judging one another, right? There's judgment placed, like a situation happens, a circumstance happens, and we interpret it with judgment always. Like we always do this. It's impossible not to. So the practice of nonviolent communication is actually to take the information that you've received from an interaction, remove the judgment, and then be able to communicate without judgment. And this is just like such a great tool to use in relationships, in the workplace, like literally everywhere. Mom, do you have anything to add to that? I know that was just like a long.
Yeah, no, all I'm thinking is how profound it is to learn these skills, and also it really is a practice. You know, I was just reflecting on when you were going through school and learning all of this. At the same time, I was learning about boundaries and setting boundaries. So the information that you were giving me about nonviolent communication actually gave me a tool to set boundaries without it being heated or hot or for lack of a better word, just angry or violent in a way. So I was just thinking about how we were paralleling, learning different things that is cultivating us now to be able to work with our clients on that piece. So, but with nonviolent communication, boundaries are really hard to set. So they have to go together. And that's the tool that we're really help a lot of our clients with.
Yeah, because I think, you know, when you think of like setting boundaries with somebody, you're like, I have to be firm and I have to like, you know, it's almost like feels kind of aggressive. And I think that's why so many of us don't do it, is because we're like, I don't want to be an asshole. Like, I don't want to like offend somebody else by setting a boundary. And I think we can actually, like when we use a tool like nonviolent communication, when we actually set a real boundary that's like aligned with who we are and what our needs are and what our values are, it's actually a really compassionate thing to do. Because and I like think about this through my parenting, because like toddlers, like parenting toddlers, if you have ever had kids and you know this, like they need boundaries. They need like loving, compassionate bumpers to constantly be bumping up against, because they're exploring the world. They're like pushing in all these different directions. And if you can't be firm but firm with love and firm with respect, then they feel really out of control. And I don't think it's just toddlers who feel that way. I think it's everyone we're in relationship with. So to set really loving, kind boundaries with respect for the other person is actually a really compassionate thing to do for the people around you, because it creates a lot of certainty for them in how to interact with you and what you're okay with. And I think so much of our like social anxiety that we have comes from not knowing the people around us, like what their boundaries are. And if we just like walked around with like these billboards of like, here's who I am and here are my boundaries, it would be so much easier to interact with each other, right? So I think like having a tool like nonviolent communication, and I can kind of like break down a little bit of what that tool is here in a minute, but having a tool like this really is such a respectful way to communicate with other people, and creates, and I think this is why it's nonviolent, is like it creates more opportunities for peace and more opportunities for harmony and all of these things that like we really want deep down, right?
And I think when we really get good at using it, we get to understand other people differently. And like I said, it's a practice. And really the beginning of that practice has to start with your own awareness of what is happening with you internally with a situation, you know? So I think it has to go hand in hand of understanding self and then being able to use this tool.
Yeah, I agree. So what is nonviolent communication? Like, what is the formula? Basically, it feels like almost a really elementary formula, but this is appropriate because think about it, most of us never learned how to communicate. So whenever we learn something, we start at an elementary level, right? We work our way up. So sometimes people looking at this are like, really, that's it? It's that simple? but it's much more complex in practice than it is on paper, right? So it really starts with identifying that we have observation, we have feelings, we have needs, and we have requests. And that's basically the formula that we follow in communicating, especially during a time of conflict, but you can use this in any communication that you have with somebody. And so in that, we have to have an awareness of how to observe a situation as like a neutral party, which is, again, is impossible because we put judgment on everything. So like, you know, if my toddler consistently throws his socks on, he's not a toddler anymore, preschooler. If my preschooler consistently throws his socks on the floor everywhere, every time he gets in the house, he's like, he'll strip off his shoes and strip off his socks and just throw them anywhere. And it drives me freaking nuts because we have a basket. He knows where they go. He knows where he's supposed to put them. And like, I can look at this situation and take it really personally. He's not listening to me. He's not abiding by what I want. Like, he is being lazy. These are all judgments of the situation, when really the observation or the non-judgmental way to look at the situation would be to see there are socks on the floor. There are socks on the floor, and we have a basket over here where the socks are supposed to go. Like, there's no judgment in that. So if I can communicate to him, hey, I noticed your socks are on the floor and they're supposed to be in this basket over here, then he'll go, oh, and he'll get up and go put them where they're supposed to go. But if I bring in all my judgment and I'm like, why don't you put your socks where they're supposed to go? You always dump them on the floor. Then he immediately feels like, she's accusing me of something, I'm going to fight back, right? And we do this in all conflict. So it's like being able to take that the judgment out of the observation and just say, if I was a third party coming in, bird's eye view, what would I be seeing? And so that's what the first thing you kind of are training yourself to do, is look at situations without judgment. And then you're looking at how you feel about the situation. So it's like, when I see the socks on the floor, what feeling arises in me? And this can be really challenging for some people because we've not been taught to identify what our feelings really are. And we think our feelings are actually judgments. So we'll be like, well, I feel, gosh, I have a hard time even doing it wrong. I feel like you're not listening to me, is what most people would say. Like, they would say, I feel like you, blah, 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 which is not a feeling at all. That's a judgment, right? So we have to be like, I feel irritated. I feel annoyed. I feel unheard. Like, we have to identify what is the underlying feeling behind the situation. And then from there, we can go into what our need is. And so we have to have a basic understanding of what our basic needs are, and then kind of what our higher level needs are. So in this situation, I might just be like, I have a need for peace and harmony in my home. And I like to be really focused when I'm working, or I like to be able to have fun when I'm with my kids. And in order for that to happen, I need my home environment to be clean and peaceful and harmonious, right? And organized. And so my basic need is really just for peace and harmony. And with having stuff on the floor everywhere, that disrupts that need. So when I'm explaining this to the person, or when I'm communicating this in nonviolent communication, I can say, hey, I'm seeing that every time you come in the house, you are just leaving your socks right here in the middle of the floor. And we have this basket over here where socks and shoes are supposed to go. I'm feeling frustrated, and I really have a need for our house to be clean and organized so that we can have fun together when we're home. So the final step would be making a request. So would you be able to move your socks from right here to the basket where they go? And then one step further from that would be like, would you be able to make an effort to put your socks in the basket where they go every time you come in the house? Can you try and do that for me? And he'll be like, oh yeah, sure. Right? He won't meet that request with hardly any hesitation, or he might, and then I can inquire and get curious about like why he says no. And in all of that interaction, there's never any defensiveness that goes up. So it gives way for a solution to come about, because when we have walls up, there's no solution that can happen. And we see this on, a very small level conflict like the socks on the floor. And we see this in really huge conflict, like what's going on in our world right now.
Mm-hmm.
Where when those walls and those belief systems are like super fully formed, there's like no way that there can be resolution.
Mm-hmm. I love that description, Julie. And it's an easy one for us to see. And then when we go into adult to adult relationships, sometimes it takes a minute for us to really unpack, because a lot of us have established patterns in relationships, like a marriage or a family member. So sometimes that kind of practice takes us a minute because I think that there's so many judgments there, or so many stories there, that it takes us just a bit for us to unpack that piece, so we can realize that there is a totally objective way to observe the situation. And I think that takes practice. And that was a conversation we had with one of our Unleashed clients this week, was breaking that whole piece down, and really taking a look at what was really happening, because we can get heated. And I know I've practiced nonviolent communication with still a spin on it or still energy on it. And every single time I do that, it doesn't work. So it has to have that neutrality. It has to have that black and white observation of the situation without, all of the judgments around it. And I think when we also really get centered on what we're really feeling, that helps us understand a lot more about ourselves.
And like, think you've lived this way for 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. Like, you have deeply ingrained communication habits. Like, communication is just a habit.
Yeah.
And when you cohabitate with another human, you enter into like dual habits, right? And so it can be really challenging to start changing your communication style when you and your partner have been communicating together for 10 years in a very distinct, like you do a little dance, right? So when one person starts to shift that and disrupt it, it can feel really weird to the other person. And I think that's where this like becomes really challenging to start implementing in your life, is because then you're like, well, they're still meeting me with a lot of defensiveness, and they're still meeting me with like, anger, or we have our different control dynamics, which we can kind of talk about in a minute, because I think that's another piece to this. But like, we just have to know that these things take time. It's like starting a new workout routine. Like, you don't get fit overnight.
Yeah.
And like any communication is just another sort of skill set that you have to develop, you have to practice. And you can learn the tools, but like, if you're not actually putting it into practice,
Yeah, change is going to happen.
doesn't really help. Yeah.
Exactly. And again, I always tell people, this is a part of your transformation, is learning to communicate differently. And really, when you stick with it and you start understanding it, it is actually the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for the other people in your life. And I was just thinking about one of our other Unleashed clients who's been really integrating all this information, was actually she was visiting her mom and her sibling, and saw that they were having some not very great communication. So she started bringing some of the inquiry and curiosity to the situation, and really kind of asserting herself in a really loving manner. And she came back and was like, oh my gosh, I helped them change their communication strategy by just giving them some of this information. So it really is. And she felt really good about it, because she left that situation feeling like she brought some peace to the situation. So it's just amazing how fast this really can change things, but also that it is a practice.
And like, I think just to say, this is one of the most loving things that you can do for the people around you. Wow, they might initially be like kind of resistant, like, why are you communicating with me in a different way than you have before? Like, you just don't know how far reaching the ripple of your personal change goes. And I think that was what was so humbling for me this week when she shared that was just to be like, man, like you just don't know these little skill sets, these little tools, these little tweaks that you can make in your life. Like she's sharing those with her extended family. Like I had no idea that like in teaching her that would have an impact on people. I don't even know them, you know, or I don't even know you. I might not know you who's listening to this podcast. And like, it's just so cool to me and kind of magical to think about like how when we're really intentional about what we're learning and how we're changing ourselves, like we just have no idea, no concept of like how far reaching that can be. And that's like one of my favorite things about what we do.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I think it's helpful to share too that we talk about nonviolent communication, but we also use this tool called control dramas, which helps us sort of identify the roles of how we're dealing with conflict in our family units or even at work. I mean, this can be used, it doesn't have to be used with people that you're intimate with, but it can be used at work as well. And that is, I came across this about 20 years ago, and it came from the Celestine Prophecy by James Redfield. And he came up with this idea of control dramas. And again, it's kind of like nonviolent communication. You can Google it. There's all kinds of articles out there. You'll see a lot of psychologists will actually talk about this more, because sometimes I think that this helps. It's a great therapy tool to kind of identify the control dramas. And really, the whole idea around control dramas is that, Julie and I end up talking about energy a lot. We talk about, where are you getting your energy? How do you feel energized to move forward, to go through challenges? And, a lot of us feel low energy. And we can really feel low energy if we're hanging around with people that have some toxic communication traits. And so a lot of times we're trying to assert ourselves and get energy through other people. And really the best way to get energy is from self. And your connection to yourself and how you're managing yourself. But many of us are trying to get energy from others. And I don't mean this in sort of a dark way. It's just a natural human way, right, Julie? It's not like purposely going, I'm going to get energy from other people. But we all have had people in our lives where we spend time with them and we walk away like, I am exhausted hanging out with that person, and that's because that person is not managing their own energy well. So now they're trying to get energy from other people, and this is what is known as control dramas. And so we really introduce this to a lot of our clients because we want to help them identify where they're at in the roles of their life. And so there's really 4 control dramas. Julie, you want to kind of chat about what those are?
Yeah, I mean, you're the expert here, so I might butcher these a little bit, but so I think like the control dramas, like you said, it's like how we gain control over a situation that feels out of control for us. I guess that would be how I would explain it.
Okay.
And I think we do this when we're kind of in like our not self. like I think we have, I mean, I have a belief in kind of spiritual whatever. I'm not religious, but I have, this belief that like we have a higher self within us, like self with a capital S. And I think when we move into a control drama, it's kind of like it's our not self at work. And it's more like the survival self. It's like the person who is like trying to reach and like gain control because they feel really out of control. And this isn't really who you really are. So I think it's just helpful to acknowledge that, because we all have a tendency, like a control drama that we go into, and these are really ugly parts of ourselves. And so it can be hard to be like, oh yeah, I do that. And I just want to say, like, you might do this, but this is not you, And so like, I just think it's really like, we want to be really mindful about what we claim and who we are. And I don't want you to be listening to this and going, oh, that's me, I'm that person. No, you're not that person. This is just one of your strategies for gaining control. That's not a good strategy. And you can like, let go of that strategy.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I think we start out with kind of the least aggressive of the strategies is the poor me, or I would say more like the victim, right? So like if you're having a conflict with somebody, this is the person who all of a sudden goes into like victim mode everything's happening to them. It's really like it's almost like they surrender their energy. Like they're like, I don't have anything. And like, that's actually their way of gaining energy from other people. So because the other person forces the other person to like feel bad for them or like come to the rescue for them. It's a very disempowered way to be.
Yeah.
And I
Mhm.
think, I mean, I can fully own that this is my control drama. And I think my husband would be fine with me sharing that it's his also. And so it can be hard for us when we're really kind of in our not self, like least resourceful state, like very low energy, and we enter into a conflict or a conversation, we both tend to go victim. And it's like we're fighting over who's giving the other person energy. And like we really stopped doing this. We don't do it hardly anymore because we've identified it and been able to be like, we're not doing that anymore. But it's really like it doesn't feel good at all. I don't know. You probably have more to add to that, Mom.
I think that I think this is an easy state to get into when you feel overwhelmed with situations and you feel overwhelmed and you don't have enough strategies to deal with things. We tend to feel sorry for ourselves. And I mean, I've definitely had some moments where I thoroughly understood that I was a poor me. I would say that when I had breast cancer, I went way into poor me, and I started acknowledging that this was not a great strategy. Like
Survival.
yeah, it was like, no, I don't want to be a victim of my circumstance, and I want some power here. So I also think that's why I started exploring this stuff, because I didn't like that piece. So and then the other passive part is aloof, and that is really someone who just kind of goes mysterious.
I would say
Uh,
also, just to add to poor me, it's
yeah,
like picture Eeyore.
Eeyore all the way. Woe
Eeyore,
is me.
Eeyore vibes.
World is always sucks. And I mean, we all know those people, and it's exhausting because it's almost impossible to get them out of that story. But you do give them a lot of energy, and you end up helping people, and you ask yourself, why am I always helping these people? Well, they probably controlled you from that space of, their poor me story and what is going on with them. So yeah, and then there's the other flip side of that, is that somebody who's being aloof. Now, this is a person who is not sharing a lot. They're actually acting very mysterious. I don't know if you've ever been around anyone where something is not right, but they're not talking about it. And they kind of go radio silence, but you can tell there's still a bunch of stuff happening in there. That's a person who's now using aloof to get energy. So it's
Because
not
they're like making you chase them.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And I can say that I've done that strategy a lot when I have not known what to do with a situation. I would say that but my partner and I have that as one of our strategies, is we just go aloof, because we sort of want the attention of the other person, but part of it too is you're not really sure what to do with it. So you just kind of go radio silence on that piece. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I
Um,
think this can be like, we should say this is
yeah.
different than like saying, like, if you're in a conflict with somebody, this is different than being like, hey, I need a minute to calm myself down and walking away. Like, that's actually a healthy strategy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas aloof would just be like, whatever, it's fine. I'm not mad. Walk away, slam the door. And you're like, well,
Yeah.
clearly you're mad. Like, and you're
Yeah.
not going to talk to me about it. Like, that would be the
Uh,
aloof, because now you're like, I got to chase them and go figure out what's.
Yes, yes. And I would say that how you know you're dealing with a aloof person, well, actually, how you know you're dealing with someone in control drama is if you feel like you're walking on eggshells. Like, I don't know what to say now. I don't know what to do now.
It's a lose lose.
Yeah, it is a lose-lose situation. So that's more of the passive side of control dramas. And then the more aggressive side, we flip into interrogator. And that is somebody who is consistently asking you interrogating questions. And this is different than somebody who's just inquiring. Somebody who's like, hey, what do you want for dinner tonight? What are you in the mood for? That's not interrogator. And interrogator is somebody who is like, you say something and they're like, well, how come you're like that? So they basically ask unanswerable questions to get energy from you. And it's like, then you go down the rabbit hole of answering that question, then they ask you another one. It's like you can't please them with your answer. Do you have anything to add to that, Julie?
Not really.
No. Okay. All
I
right.
think you nailed
Okay.
it.
So that, that is one of those things where I would say a lot of people don't realize that they do that or that somebody's doing that to them because it seems innocent. Somebody's just asking me a question, but then you get exhausted trying to answer the question. There is no where they say, "Oh my gosh, I totally understand. Thanks for clarifying." They never say that. And I've definitely had a lot of those kinds of people in my life, and I have found myself doing that as well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's just you're just trying to get energy, so you just keep asking questions. And then the extremist version of a control drama is being intimidator. That's the most aggressive. And intimidator is just, I mean, it's very clear. Somebody's intimidating you by bullying, by threatening. So they're really making some powerful statements, and you can feel that. And the response usually is to back away or fight back, so a lot of times you'll fight back, you'll be aggressive back. And I think, this isn't meant to be a training on all of these things, but we just wanted to open this up so you had an understanding of how to use this with nonviolent communication, how to identify yourself. And these are the conversations that we end up having one-on-one with some of our clients because, that when they identify what they are, when they identify maybe what their child is, or maybe what their partner is or coworker is, it helps us help them now create a new strategy. And like, oh my gosh, I mean, we've had a couple clients say, "I'm an intimidator," and they're, like, "Oh my gosh, that's horrible." And it's like, it's
Yeah.
not horrible. It's just a strategy you've been using. Now let's unpack it. And now let's start using different tools. And it really is easy to dissolve these old ways of being. And you're not bad. People aren't bad. It's just how we've learned to navigate the world.
Yeah, and I think we learn these things often from our parents. Like we pick up on like how our parents handled what their control dramas were, and we might like go the complete opposite direction. Like if you had an intimidator as a parent, you might go poor me. Or maybe you had poor me parents and you learned that like you had to be in control and then you became the intimidator. So I think often we learn these from the people who have been in our lives. And like, honestly, the people in our lives usually haven't looked at this either for themselves. So it's not to blame them or judge them for like how they effed us up, but
Yeah.
it's just to say like, oh, that's where this came from. And that can be really helpful and kind of empowering to look at that and just be like, I was conditioned to be this way. This really isn't me, and this isn't how I want to be. And I can do better and I can change this. And I think that's where you can use this information to be empowering and not just like, be feeling bad about how you communicate with somebody else, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. And I think also, the main thing is to be aware of this, and then you can start to call it out, and that's a whole nother strategy that we won't go into today, but just know that there's the easiest thing, first of all, is just to say, if somebody's intimidating you, you can address, and you could actually use the whole nonviolent formula, but you can just be able to say, "Stop intimidating me," or "It feels like you're intimidating me." So it's kind of calling out the control drama and being able to be aware of what is happening. And for the beginning part, we can help people identify, what do you do with that?
Yeah. And I think if you are interested in learning more about this, and like she said, like if you're interested in learning like how to call it out, how to stop it, how to actually utilize this as a tool in your life, we are going to do a training on that. So I'll put a link in the show notes or in the description below this video if you're watching on YouTube, where you can go and register for free for that training. And it'll be like probably an hour training that'll come out maybe next week. Or if you're watching this way after we recorded
Whenever.
it's accessible to you. You can go register and get a copy of it. Just look in the show notes. And because I think this information can be so empowering, like when you actually know like, oh, I can identify that I'm being intimidated right now, and I know exactly what to say to stop it, and like hold my energy. Like I can be in control of my energy, and I get to choose if I give that to somebody else or not. And I think that's where this then becomes a life-changing skill. And same with nonviolent communication. Like it really is all about I mean, we say this all the time. It's all about your energy. Like, we are energetic beings. There's energy all around us. It's not to say sound woo woo, but
Mm.
like, we like, who wants to go through life feeling tired and like not in control of themselves? Like, none of us want to be that person.
Mhm.
So to use these as tools to really like hone your energy and be who yourself with a capital S, and like interact with the world that way is so cool. Why wouldn't you want to do that?
Yeah, yeah, and it's freeing, and also it dials down on feeling better in your relationships, and ultimately that's what we want, is to have meaningful, kind, and it doesn't mean that it might just be small tweaks and changes. You might acknowledge to yourself, oh, my best friend is really kind of an interrogator, and I'd like to change the dynamic there because I still really love that person. So there's really ways that you can tweak these things without it being a tremendous upheaval. I've definitely worked with women that are in relationships with intimidators, and it is more of an upheaval because it's a really unhealthy dynamic. But not all relationships are just an unhealthy dynamic. It's just that we have unhealthy ways of dealing with things. And we haven't been taught, coming back to our beginning topic here, we just haven't been taught this. And really, once you start to understand it and start doing it, it's a game changer. It's a game changer for our clients. Clients that think, oh my gosh, this relationship has to end. And all of a sudden they're like, no, I'm the problem. And all I have to do is change me. And the relationship can evolve into something more positive. So, all of this stuff is just really meant to help us be much more impactful in our own awareness and our mindfulness of how we're moving around the world. And really, I think most of us just want to feel love. And when we start using these processes and tactics and strategies, we actually open ourselves up to receive more, not less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
I think like this goes back to, if you listen to the first episode where we talk about strengths, right? That was the first episode, I think, where we talk
Yes.
about strengths and talents and gifts. Like, we all have the same core needs, right? And we all, I mean, how that expresses is very different. And like what our values are very different, and what our gifts are very different. But like, we all have the same basic needs. Like, we want to enjoy life. We want to be loved. We want to love. We want to be accepted. We have all of these. Some are more survival needs. Some are more like higher level needs. But like, they're all the same, but the way that they come through can be very different for different people. And so to have the awareness of like, oh, this is my control drama, and these are my strengths over here, and these are how they work together to form like my communication style, that can also be really helpful. And that's
Yeah.
part of what we do in our strength sessions with people, is just like really get them clear on like, what are my control dramas, what are my strengths, what are my, like, how does my energy function, like really get clear on like, what's my makeup as a human. And this is what we go in depth in our Unleashed program, and do a complete like upheaval of your whole life and all of your beliefs about yourself, and like really look at each individual sector in each individual box. But it's so helpful to be like, oh, these are how these connect together, and like, here's what I do with that. Like, here's, because I think so many of us might look at control dramas or learn about them and then just be like, okay, so I'm that, but like, now what?
Mhm.
And that's where I think learning how to like actually, what's the strategy moving forward, can be so helpful.
Yeah, and really how to put it all together. I think that's the thing I've seen over my years of working with folks is, people can identify these things, but then they don't know how to unpack it, how to, what are the words to use. So
Yeah.
I feel that's a lot of the stuff that we end up helping women with, is really understanding, like, how does that come from you, not from us just telling you use this formula, because that feels really odd to people, right? So it's like having to really, what are your words? How would you put this together?
Yeah.
And how does that authentic to you? Because it feels clunky in the beginning to make this shift, but once people start understanding it, then it's so much more authentic and feels so much better than the old ways of biting back or reacting or being defensive, and all the things that we do because we're trying to protect ourselves, but it actually keeps us from truly connecting. So that's why we really want to chat with you guys about this today, and hopefully you heard something in here that opened up an awareness or a desire to maybe shift something. And like Julie said, we have a couple opportunities here to get on this webinar. And we'll leave information below. And then also we still offer that Strength Finder session. We love doing this. It's just a one and done conversation. It's for those of you who just want to, just learn a little bit more about yourself without committing to something huge. We love doing this. It's a 90-minute call, right, Julie?
Yeah, it's 90 minutes.
Yeah. Awesome.
It's 90 minutes, and I think I was just gonna look up. It is how much? I don't even remember. It's not a lot. It's not a huge investment. It's 90 minutes on a call with both of us. Oh, it's 250. So you can do that. You'll get a 90-minute session where we really, beforehand, you'll take the Gallup Strengths Finder assessment. So we go into it already having looked at all of your information, and our intention here is really to help you come up with strategies that work for you in identifying your control dramas, your gifts, your talents, your strengths, and like how all those things work together so that you can move forward in your business or in your life, in your relationships, whatever you get to pick the area that we're kind of focused on. But you can come out of that feeling like, I have a game plan. I understand how to use these things now. I can be way more energy efficient and stop trying to be like somebody else, because that's not who I am. I feel like that's what mostly happens is people go, oh, all these things that I thought were like my weaknesses and my downfalls and like what was wrong with me is actually what my strengths are. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's magic. I think it's like one of my most favorite things that we get to do with people. So
I agree.
A link is below or in the show notes. If you want to schedule one of those, you totally can. And yeah, I hope this planted some seeds of sparks of inspiration for you guys this week. And we'll see you back here again next week.
Thank you. Bye.